Today I'll be working on this 2015 Mercedes GLA250. The customer's complaint is that it'll start, run, idle, and just eventually stall out or stop running. And you can get it started, but it'll just keep stalling. So that's what it's here for, and that's what we're gonna check. Obviously, I got some things already hooked up. I've scanned this previously a couple of days ago, so I've got some sort of general idea of where I'm going with it, but I'll get you shot of the codes and tell you what I want to look at. Okay, so this is the scan from the other day. I haven't connected and turned on the key today just yet, and I'll explain why. So the codes that I am interested in: engine computer, so fuel pressure, system too low. And if you see below that, fuel pump control unit, one is stating that power supply is too low and that the fuel pressure in the system is too low. So once, seeing these, those are the ones that I'm going to concentrate based off of the symptoms of obviously stalling. If we're having some sort of fuel system problem, obviously it's going to stall. This has obviously a high pressure fuel system, which you have a pump here, and then you've got an electric pump in the fuel tank that's going to send fuel up here. My first thoughts was to try to determine and differentiate a low pressure problem from high pressure system problem, and so I'm going to try to monitor that. And also, because of seeing those voltage too low pressure code in the fuel pump control module, I'm going to monitor the voltage supply to it at the module. Here in the back, I've got the voltage for the module, low fuel system pressure sensor signal. So once fuel pressure gets built up in the low pressure system, this voltage will rise and then show us that there is fuel pressure there. So I'm going to monitor basically fuel pressure there for the low system, the voltage, and then here up front in the engine compartment, I'm going to monitor the control of the high pressure pump as well as the rail pressure sensor signal to monitor fuel pressure there in the high system. And one thing I would have liked to do, and I might still, depending on what I see, is I want to watch the amperage going to the electric pump, but we'll probably add that here in a little bit. First thing is, I didn't want to open this door. This one's been open, so I've been able to get in there, gain access to piercing the harness. Because once you wake these vehicles up, they'll activate and run the electric pump, so on and so forth. So I just wanted to start from basically having the vehicle asleep, and then I'll wake it up and start monitoring. Obviously, I'll get you a shot of what the vehicle does at the same time that I am scoping all those signals. Okay, so I'll get ready to wake the vehicle up. One thing, I kind of have the fuel pressure sensor scaled from information I found on in-service information. So hopefully they can correlate to actual pressure readings. Okay, I've got the scope running up there, and I've got the live data for the fuel system. Right away. So I'm just letting it run. Hopefully it'll stall out. There we go. So let's go see what we captured. Okay, so if we go over this, the data, this was when we first started the vehicle. Our voltage drop, cranked up, and start running. Our fuel pressure on the high rail, once engine started running, here we can tell it ramped up and went over stabilized. Here's our low fuel pressure reading that kicked on and stayed kind of level for a little bit. And the green obviously is our control valve on the high pressure pump. To get some numbers right now, let's see, on the, high pressure, let's get the low pressure reading, and I guess volts for now. We have on the low side only about 33 psi. We've got 2,500 psi on the high rail and 11 volts for the fuel pump control module, which obviously is going to feed the low pressure pump. But if we continue on to, let's see, let's call it the next page. Look at where our fuel pressure on the low side went to, the blue channel down here. It's dropped down to, and then hold on, let me get the voltage reading correctly and around. Okay, so got all our markers accordingly. So our low pressure supposedly has dropped down to close to 12 psi. That's still around 25. Our voltage at the fuel pump control module now is on our charge voltage. It's 14.5, just about 14.5 volts. So right now it's getting supplied with enough voltage. Our fuel pressure on the low side has dropped down from 30 and change to 12. And right now we're still able to maintain and or produce 2,500 up in the rail, which I believe that was close to the data we were looking at. If we then scroll over, this is where it's stalled. We clearly see the red ramping down to down to almost zero basically, and that's when we stop running, because we can't run if there's no high pressure fuel being created. The whole time this still staying down at the basically 12 psi. Our voltage is still up in the 14.5. We still have fuel pump control for the high side. We just dropped in high pressure. Like, it couldn't keep creating that high of a pressure, it looks like. Now, someone can very easily read a code, basically shotgun a high pressure fuel pump, thinking that that's what the problem is. And I'll admit, originally, that's kind of where my mindset went, but I wanted to test to make sure to not make the wrong call. I didn't want to throw an expensive high pressure pump and then still have the same problem, be stuck with a pump I can't do nothing with. So right now, it doesn't even look like it's a high pressure system problem, even though the pressure drops. And on the scan data, obviously the pressure spec and reading also drop off. So if you're just scanning it, looking at the code, looking at the data, see that the pressure is from 2,600 and drops down to 100 to 400, you're almost going to blame the high pressure system. Right now, I think I want to concentrate on the low pressure system. I'm going to try to see if I can correlate the readings to what the scanner is pulling up. So scope is running. I'm only going to key it on. So Okay, supposedly in the rail around 775 or so. Let's see where this goes. Okay, not too far off. And then our low side went to 32 for only for a little bit of the key on, and it's holding steady at 14 right now. Let me see if I can find a low pressure pin. Okay, we've got one there. So yeah, our readings are pretty close. They're matching up to what the scanner's seeing, which would make sense if that's the voltage readings the sensors are creating, that the computers are going to generate those numbers. One thing, so that supposedly is the feed that we have been seeing. Let's look at that. Huh, interesting. So those two went down and the vehicle stalled. A couple things I wanted to share and show you guys before continuing. One thing that is sort of a concern. One thing, well, first of all, the whole placement of the module and low pressure pump are pretty dumb in my opinion as far as this vehicle goes. The module is not accessible other than like this cavity chamber channel back there, and not sure if you can. Someone's been in here already, and the fact that someone's been in here messing around, actually there's another module there that is just loose, so someone was probably looking for the fuel pump control module. Again, it's in this like metal channel back there, but the other disappointing thing, and I'm surprised being Mercedes, usually all Europeans kind of think of everything. There is, and for the year, there is no access port for the fuel pump. And actually, I didn't even notice that, but look, there's a bolt there. Someone's been in here messing around, chasing this problem, and obviously it's not been rectified. And before I start throwing parts at it now, we need to figure out exactly what's going on. The crappy thing is, it looks like we're going to have to get under the vehicle, drop the tank to gain any type of access to the fuel pump. Okay, so I think lastly, one thing I want to check, since I can here from up top, is I've added 3 more leads to check. This is actually, it's a 3-phase fuel pump, and obviously the control module will control the 3 phases. So I've added the 3 phases, still have the voltage, still have the low pressure sensor, and up front just the high pressure sensor. I've got rid of the fuel pump control up there. So let's go ahead. And the vehicle's been off for a while, so it might wake up with opening of the door or whatnot. We'll be able to see that on the blue trace, which is low pressure. So let's see what we get. The pump ran, and I'll start it. Okay. Okay, so this is the capture. One thing, it looks like I lost my low pressure signal, maybe a connection issue, but I'll have to look at that. But this is our three phases, this bunched up group. Here we can see that they stopped, and then shortly after that, looks like our fuel pressure dropped. This here is the voltage. Let's see what was going on there. So it looks like it finally had just jumped up from off battery up to fully charging, but then stalled out. We are losing three-phase control to the electric pump. I am going to, first of all, get that back up for a better visualization. Second, I'm going to add the pulse width modulation control from the engine computer. I want to make sure we're not losing that, because if we lose that, then we lose control to the pump itself. And I guess we'll kind of go from there. Okay, so I've run the same start, run, let it idle until it dies. I added the pulse width signal, which is this like teal blue down there. And as you can tell, well, first thing to notice, before, if you remember, we'd have some pressure on the low side and then it drops out. That what we are seeing is, here's the three-phase, and once the three-phase stops being basically run or controlled, we stop making higher pressure and we drop down. But so that correlates, and that's all related to the low fuel pressure system that controls the fuel pump. That's the fuel pump control. This is the pressure being made by that fuel pump. As far as the activation command, I'm not seeing any really. There's a lot of like hash there, but a lot of the channels have that. So here's a clearer picture. There, it does start off. I am making good connection. I double checked that. And so we start off at almost 11 volts, and you can tell it drops down when there is activity, so there's something going on. And it drops down basically down to 0, and it stays at that point the whole time. There's never what I would call a duty cycle control signal there, even though we are running the low fuel pressure pump. So I'm wondering if it's the fuel pump control module activates and runs the pump regardless, that there is no pulse width signal, and after some point of not getting one, it just drops out and stops controlling the low fuel pressure. The thing that puzzles me, and that we can clearly see, is we drop down to, what was that, 11 or 12? Let's see. So we go average from about 30 down to, 13 psi. 13 psi, and we're still running and making up on the high pressure. Let's call it an estimated 2500. That is crazy to me. I would almost always state that you have to have good low pressure to make high pressure, which that the statement kind of is true in both ways, because we see that we need higher pressure to keep the engine running, but we're making high pressure with low pressure. So it's crazy and it's odd. And like before, if you let it idle, and it'll idle for a minute or so, it starts to drop. Once I saw it dropping, I decided to rev it up, see if I could keep it running. and it maintained for a little. I think that's somewhere in the range where I revved it up. But then it couldn't maintain. Let's see what it dropped down to. It's about 1600 at that point. But yeah, weird, crazy. Again, I think I'm still staying on the low fuel pressure side for checking to see why we have what seems to be not enough fuel pressure and also no fuel pump control. I'm going to tap in. This again is the signal. I think I'm going to check over at the actual computer because I'm at the pump here in the back. See what that looks like there. All right, so found the correct wire. I'm tapped in. Got the scope running. All right, let me turn it off. Oh, turn it off by itself. Okay, so no activation here either. So at the computer, at the pump, same line, no duty cycle control for the low pressure pump. So to try to help verify, I've pulled another one in. It's a V6, but it has the same exact control module. It's located here. And I'm tapped into the what's supposed to be the pulse width signal line, and also one of the three legs of the fuel pump, the 3-phase. I wanted to see what the pulse width looked like on a known good. Obviously the car is running idly. I'm only running 2 channels. And I want you to look at something, so I'll stop. The blue is the pulse width. The red is the one of the legs, again, of the 3-phase, which you can tell right there. Look at where the blue is at. It's down at the bottom. This car is running. We know that because the 3-phase pump is spinning. Let's go back. It's running. Here's the beginning. The only signs of anything are these little drop-offs and these kind of upward rises, but that's after the voltage drops. So basically what I'm getting at, initially I thought I was getting pulse width signals being captured, but I'm not. I think it's just like static stuff going on because it's constantly held up when I key it up, and those are kind of just static drop-offs, let's call it. It's not actual pulse width control signals. So this was when I keyed it on for priming, and look, the voltage dropped down to 0, stayed at 0 as the pump spun and primed. When it stopped, it rose up to pretty much almost 11 volts. And then let's scroll on over. When we cranked it to get it running, again, it drops down to almost 0, and the pump starts to spin, and it stays spinning. So definitely not what I was expecting, and almost again led to an incorrect call of thinking that the engine computer is not pulse width controlling this channel. But here on the known good, we are running, we're spinning the pump, and we are seeing that there's basically no pulse width. It's just flat line towards the bottom portion of the scale on voltage. This one, it keeps throwing me for a loop. Initially thinking maybe the high pressure pump, then seeing that there's a problem with the low pressure system, was thinking maybe the fuel pump. Then after testing, start thinking the engine computer, but now that doesn't look to be the problem. I think the fact that, and we'll get this one going again, the fact that this voltage stays down and we still have control spinning of the pump, I am honestly thinking that possibly the fuel pump control module is at fault, which it gives me that gut feeling of I'm not 100%, because the fuel pump control module is loose, it's unbolted, it's flopping around as if someone already tried one. But it's hard to say because you can't have this activity of fuel pump rotation without the module giving it the control for this to occur. I know that the pump has to be in a good state to be able to, I guess, spin and all that, but the fact that on that vehicle we'll get some control, some spinning, and then it just cuts off and no more control. That there, after seeing this, is kind of leaning me again towards a module. Now, one thing that I can do, being that I've got lucky, is I can swap this one into that car and see if we rectify the issue. I think I'm gonna lean that way to try to get some sort of surefire answer. Okay, so here's the one from this vehicle. We've got the other one installed. We have not keyed up yet, but we want this portion to stay solid with this new module. Alright, same thing. It's not the module. It's stalled right away. Here's the original pump that we removed. Nothing crazy about it, looks like. But we got a factory new one here that just came in. We're getting ready to install it and hopefully get this one running. And just a quick shot of all that's involved with getting to this fuel pump. You do have to drop the tank. I don't know why something so new again in the Mercedes line doesn't have an access hole, but exhaust, drive shaft, tank, everything has to come down to get to the fuel pump. Okay, so got the fuel pump installed. I've got the scope running. Let's go ahead, key it up, and start it. See what the low side looks like. Okay. Scope is running. Let's look at the. Let's see. Fuel pump control. We'll take a look at the low side pressure, and then we'll look at the high side. Okay, so looks like about 70 psi, which is almost double what it was making before. The important thing, remember, we have to watch the three-phase leg that I'm monitoring. Make sure that has not gone out, which if we are making 70 psi, I'm pretty sure that leg has not disappeared, meaning the control of it, because it was dropping down to 11 psi then. But I'll get you a shot of that here in a minute. I just want to check these quick. Okay, so back up to very high rail pressure. We're dropping. I could hear the tone in the engine change. I don't know if you picked that up. That's why we are dropping, but I'm sure that it will hopefully maintain. Actually, let's go look at the low side on the scope. Let's see what that, why that drop occurred. So the red is going to be the three-phase fuel pump control. So that was our biggest indication that the pump was bad. It's still going. It's still spinning. It's still operating. Let me stop this. Okay, let's look quickly. So let me lower the. That yellow is the control valve on the high pressure pump. So in blue, I've got the low pressure. And then in green is the high pressure. And let's see quickly. So about 2500 for the high pressure. Let's see the low right there was okay, 92 on the startup. And then let's see when it stabilizes or starts to stabilize on the low side. We're at 63, 64. So pretty close to what the data PID was showing. And let's look at the high side. That's at 2500 about. And that was for that whole time. Let's go. Okay, so there's our drop. So our low side is still maintaining, but obviously we dropped on the high side. I bet that's going to be due to our control for the duty control of the, basically, let's call it check valve of the high pressure pump. And let's see if we can prove that out. So it's not a drop in pressure from lack of low pressure feed. It's just a stabilization point where it dropped the pressure a little bit lower, kind of like the low side did as well back here. Okay, let's rerun it. So on our scanner, again, 1800 on the high side. And we're still holding, good and steady on there on the scope. And I think just lastly, again, I'll go into the fuel pump control module, which, I mean, we're just going to be verifying what we're watching on the scope here. So 1800 on the high side, and let's see what the low side is doing. About, okay, there we go, 70. Okay, not exact, but close enough to do diagnosis, and we are good. We are building pressure. Our control is continuously there for our low pressure pump, or the 3 legs phases. There we go. No more shutting off of the fuel pump. Okay, so we're finally done with this Mercedes and the whole fuel pump saga deal. Ultimately, yeah, it was a low pressure fuel pump, but that could have been led to a wild goose chase of throwing a bunch of parts at it. Again, this is why you need to test and verify and take each step after each test to try to pinpoint what is really going on. I think a big turning point or clue for me was having the ability to have a known good for that engine computer duty cycle, because when it flatlined down towards the bottom, to me it seemed at first as if the computer was not sending the control signal for the fuel pump control module to then run the fuel pump. And that can very easily be misconstrued and make an incorrect call for an engine computer. Now that, again, the amount of parts that could have been thrown on this without doing the testing is a long list. When if you just go by the scan data, it looks like the high pressure pump because the pressure drops. So you could have thrown the high pressure pump and still have a problem. If you were to look at maybe the fuel pump, you think maybe the module's bad, or again the engine computer, but then ultimately it was the actual electric fuel pump, which even then it's a first for me to see that the control module basically stopped controlling it. And so it makes you think that the control module is the one at fault. But there was something enough going on with that fuel pump that the module did not like, and so it stopped the control of it. So I hope that this whole whirlwind of testing and finding what I found helps some of you guys out there when you get this low pressure trouble code in one of the Mercedes. Keep in mind, this type of system and setup is pretty much across the board, all makes and models, because they all have to operate in the same way. They'll have the high pressure pump, they'll have the electric low pressure pump, they'll have a module for it, they'll have the engine computer controlling that module, they'll have the sensors, so on and so forth. So it's a good generalization testing method for all these high pressure fuel system setups, and hopefully you can use it to diagnose yours if you have an issue similar to mine. And so with that, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this one. And so that's all for this Mercedes. So I realized while I was editing that, again, I wish that I would have had an amp clamp. But when editing, I noticed that I did collect this data pin in the vehicle when it was in its bad state. Now, that car's fixed and gone, but I do still have the same E350 that I used as a known good. Now, that's the same style 3-phase pump, same control module. I am in the low pressure control module live data. Here is the amperage. It's been idling maybe 5 minutes. There's the voltage pin. If you remember, I think this went like 11 and that was like 8, and then it shut itself off. But just to get you a shot, so it looks like the longer it runs, it drops down to the 1 something, because beforehand it would be around the 3 and then drops down as far as amperage. But let's see if I can get a shot of that. So key on. There you go. And now it's up in the 8 like the other one, but then it drops down quick, and then the voltage also. So again, looks like it shoots up, but then should come down in the 3 and then down to like the 1 as far as the amperage. And I'm now wondering and curious if that was the whole problem, just too much of an amperage draw. The module sees it, and then there you go, and then it cuts down the control power supply to it to protect itself as far as the module. Odd that it doesn't. If that's truly the case, odd that there's not some sort of algorithm written in there to display some sort of trouble code so that it can help identify what the situation is.